The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla stepped out of her private quarters. Her emerald green coat perfectly pressed, and her pearl necklace catching the early sunlight. She had been queen consort for nearly 2 years now, but some days still felt like a test of her worthiness to wear the crown that history had never intended for her. As she walked through the ancient corridors toward the state apartments, her heels clicked against the polished stone floors with purpose. Today was particularly important. She was scheduled to meet with representatives from several charitable organizations, and the press would be watching every move, every gesture, every word. "Your Majesty," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see James Richardson, one of the palace guards who had been stationed at Windsor for over 15 years. His military bearing was impeccable, his uniform spotless, but something in his tone made Camilla pause. "Yes, James?" she replied, maintaining the warm but formal tone she had perfected over the years. "Ma'am, there's been a change in the security protocol for today's event. The head of security wants to move your meeting to the smaller reception room instead of the grand hall." Camilla frowned slightly. This was the 3rd time this month that last-minute changes had been made to her scheduled events. While she understood that security was paramount, she also knew that these constant alterations often made her look unprepared, or worse, unimportant in the eyes of the media and the public. "James, I need to understand something," she said, stepping closer to the guard. "These changes keep happening to my events, specifically. When the king has his meetings, when other senior royals have their engagements, do these sudden protocol changes occur with the same frequency?" The guard shifted uncomfortably, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Ma'am, I just follow the orders I'm given." "Ma'am, I'm sure you do," Camilla replied, her voice remaining steady but with an underlying firmness that hadn't been there moments before. "But I'm asking you a direct question, and I expect a direct answer. As your queen, I believe I deserve that much respect, don't you?" The corridor seemed to grow quieter, as if the very walls of the castle were holding their breath. James Richardson had served under 3 monarchs, had seen the rise and fall of numerous royal favorites, and had witnessed firsthand the delicate dance of palace politics. But he had never been directly challenged by Queen Camilla in quite this way. "Ma'am," he began carefully, "the truth is that the head of security, Sir Malcolm Hartwell, has expressed certain concerns about the public reception of some of your events. He feels that smaller, more controlled environments might be more suitable." Camilla felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar ache that she had carried for decades. Even now, as queen consort, she was still being treated as somehow less worthy, less deserving of the full respect and resources afforded to other members of the royal family. The implied message was clear. Her presence was still seen as potentially problematic, something to be managed rather than celebrated. "I see," she said quietly, but her voice carried a weight that made the guard straighten his shoulders involuntarily. "And does Sir Malcolm feel that my 20 years of public service, my patronage of over 90 charitable organizations, and my unwavering support of the crown somehow make me a security risk?" James Richardson found himself in an impossible position. On one hand, he had his orders from Sir Malcolm, a man known for his rigid adherence to what he considered proper protocol. On the other hand, he was face to face with a woman who had endured decades of public scrutiny, who had been painted as a villain in one of the most famous love stories in modern history, and who had somehow emerged with grace and dignity intact. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice softer now, "I've served this family for 15 years. I've seen how hard you work, how much you care about the people you meet, and the causes you support. What I'm about to tell you could cost me my position, but I think you have a right to know." Camilla waited, her heart beating faster despite her composed exterior. "Sir Malcolm has been influenced by certain members of the household staff who still hold old loyalties. There are those who believe that your events should be kept smaller, less prominent, because they feel it's not appropriate for you to have the same level of attention as, well, as the late Princess Diana used to receive. Lawn for, well, me doing. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Even after all these years, even after becoming queen, Diana's ghost still haunted the corridors of the palace. Camilla had always known this, had accepted it as part of the price she paid for loving Charles, but hearing it stated so plainly still felt like a blow to the chest. "I understand," she said finally, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you for your honesty, James. It takes courage to speak truth to power, especially when that truth is uncomfortable." James Richardson looked at the woman standing before him and realized something profound was happening. This wasn't just about a change in venue or security protocol. This was about respect, dignity, and the right of a person to be treated fairly, regardless of their complicated past. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice gaining strength, "I've watched you for years. I've seen how you interact with staff, how you remember the names of people's children, how you stay late to make sure every person at your events feels heard. I've seen you comfort grieving families and celebrate with communities. You've earned the right to be treated with the same respect as any other member of this family." Camilla felt tears threatening to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had learned long ago not to show vulnerability in public spaces within the palace, where every emotion could become gossip. Every moment of weakness could be used against her. "What would you suggest I do?" she asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. James Richardson took a deep breath. He was about to cross a line that could end his career. But something about this moment felt too important to let pass. "Ma'am, I think it's time you had a conversation with Sir Malcolm directly. Not through intermediaries. Not through polite requests sent through proper channels. A real conversation where you make it clear that you expect to be treated as the queen consort you are, not as the woman certain people wish you weren't." The suggestion was both simple and revolutionary. For years, Camilla had navigated palace politics through careful diplomacy, always deferring, always accommodating, always trying to prove that she deserved her place rather than simply claiming it. The idea of demanding respect rather than earning it felt foreign and slightly terrifying. "And if Sir Malcolm refuses to change his approach?" she asked. James Richardson straightened to his full height, and for the first time in the conversation, he looked every inch the military man he had once been. "Then, Your Majesty, perhaps it's time Sir Malcolm learned that disrespecting the queen consort is the same as disrespecting the crown itself. And in my experience, ma'am, people who disrespect the crown don't tend to keep their positions very long." The implications of his words were clear. And Camilla realized that this guard, this man who had served faithfully for 15 years, was essentially offering to support her if she chose to take a stand. It was an unexpected alliance, one that she had never thought to seek but that might prove invaluable. As they stood in the ancient corridor, surrounded by portraits of kings and queens who had ruled for centuries, Camilla made a decision that would change everything. She would no longer accept being treated as a second-class member of her own family. She was Queen Camilla, and it was time the entire palace understood what that meant. "James," she said, her voice now carrying the full authority of her position, "I want you to send a message to Sir Malcolm. Tell him that the queen consort requests his immediate presence in my private study. Tell him that we need to discuss some important changes to palace protocol, and that I expect him within the hour." "Aliar. Aliar. Aliar. Aliar." "Yes, Your Majesty," James replied. But he couldn't hide the small smile that played at the corners of his mouth. "Should I mention that this meeting is non-negotiable?" "I think," Camilla said, allowing herself a slight smile in return, "that would be an excellent addition to the message." 53 minutes later, Sir Malcolm Hartwell knocked on the door of Queen Camilla's private study with the confidence of a man who had spent his entire career believing he was untouchable. As head of security for the royal household, he had advised 3 monarchs, managed countless state visits, and prided himself on his ability to anticipate and prevent any situation that might embarrass or endanger the royal family. He had received James Richardson's message with barely concealed irritation. The idea that Queen Camilla would summon him, rather than request a meeting through proper channels, struck him as presumptuous. In his mind, she was still the woman who had caused one of the greatest scandals in modern royal history, and no amount of time or official titles could change that fundamental fact. "Enter," came Camilla's voice, from within the study. Sir Malcolm opened the door to find Queen Camilla seated behind an ornate mahogany desk, her posture erect and her hands folded calmly in front of her. The room itself was elegant but not ostentatious, decorated with family photographs, fresh flowers, and several books on British history and charitable work. What struck him immediately was the complete absence of nervousness or deference in her demeanor. "Sir Malcolm," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Please, take a seat." He remained standing, a deliberate choice meant to establish his position in what he assumed would be a brief and routine discussion. "Your Majesty requested to see me. I trust this won't take long, as I have several security briefings this afternoon." Camilla studied him for a long moment, taking in his dismissive tone and his refusal to sit. She had dealt with men like Malcolm Hartwell her entire life. Men who believed that their position gave them the right to treat others, particularly women, with condescension, disguised as professional duty. "Actually, Malcolm," she said, deliberately dropping his title and using his first name, "this conversation will take exactly as long as it needs to take. And the first thing we're going to discuss is your apparent confusion about who works for whom in this household." Sir Malcolm's eyebrows rose slightly. In 15 years of managing royal security, no member of the family had ever spoken to him with such directness. Even King Charles, for all his strong opinions, had always couched his requests in polite language and diplomatic phrases. "I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting, ma'am," he replied, though his tone had become noticeably more formal. "Then let me be perfectly clear," Camilla said, rising from her chair and moving to stand in front of the window that overlooked the castle grounds. "I am informed that you have been making unilateral decisions about my public engagements, reducing their scope and moving them to smaller venues without consulting me or my private secretary. I'm told that this is being done for security reasons, but I suspect the real reasons have nothing to do with my physical safety and everything to do with your personal opinions about my role in this family." Sir Malcolm felt a flush of anger rising in his chest. The accusation was accurate, but he had never expected to be confronted so directly about it. In his mind, he had been protecting the institution of the monarchy by carefully managing what he saw as potential public relations problems. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "my job is to protect the reputation and safety of the crown. Sometimes that requires making difficult decisions that individual family members might not initially understand or appreciate." Camilla turned away from the window and fixed him with a gaze that was both steady and penetrating. "Are you suggesting that I don't understand the requirements of royal duty? That after 20 years of public service and 2 years as queen consort, I need you to protect me from my own judgment?" "That's not what I said," Sir Malcolm replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then let me ask you a specific question," Camilla continued, moving back to her desk and pulling out a leather-bound folder. "In the past 6 months, how many times have you recommended venue changes or reduced security protocols for the king's events?" Sir Malcolm hesitated, realizing he was walking into a trap. "His Majesty's events have different requirements." "How many times, Malcolm?" Camilla's voice cut through his explanation like a blade. "None, ma'am. But the circumstances. And for the Prince of Wales? Your Majesty. This really isn't a fair comparison." "How many times?" Sir Malcolm's jaw tightened. "None. And yet," Camilla said, opening the folder and pulling out several documents, "in that same 6-month period, you recommended changes to 17 of my events." 17. Would you like to explain to me how it's possible that I represent such a unique security challenge compared to other members of my family? The silence that followed was deafening. Sir Malcolm realized that Queen Camilla had been keeping detailed records, that she had been watching and documenting his decisions far more carefully than he had given her credit for. The woman sitting across from him was not the passive, grateful stepmother figure he had assumed her to be. "The truth, Malcolm," Camilla continued, her voice softer now, but no less authoritative, "is that you have been trying to minimize my public presence because you disapprove of me personally. You believe that I am somehow less worthy of the respect and resources afforded to other members of this family because of my history with the king." Sir Malcolm opened his mouth to protest, but Camilla held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not finished," she said. "For 2 decades, I have endured public scrutiny that would have broken most people. I have been called names that I won't repeat in polite conversation. I have had my every move analyzed, criticized, and condemned by people who never bothered to learn who I actually am or what I actually stand for. And through all of it, I have continued to serve this crown with dignity and dedication." She stood up again, but this time her movement was fluid and purposeful rather than defensive. "I have never asked for special treatment. I have never demanded privileges that weren't earned. But I will no longer tolerate being treated as somehow less deserving of basic professional respect because certain people in this household cannot move beyond their prejudices." Sir Malcolm found himself in completely unfamiliar territory. He had expected defensiveness, perhaps tears, maybe even anger, that he could dismiss as emotional volatility. What he had not expected was this calm, methodical dismantling of his behavior and the assumptions that had driven it. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice considerably more respectful than it had been when he entered the room. "I may have been overzealous in my security assessments." "Overzealous," Camilla repeated, and there was something almost amused in her tone. "That's an interesting way to describe deliberate disrespect, but I appreciate the acknowledgement, even if it's couched in diplomatic language." She moved to a bookshelf and pulled out a volume on royal protocol, flipping through it with practiced ease. "Malcolm, I want you to understand something very clearly. I didn't choose to become queen consort lightly. I knew the challenges, the history, the baggage that would come with this position. But I also know my value, my strengths, and my commitment to this institution. What I will not do is apologize for existing or accept being treated as a problem to be managed rather than as an asset to be utilized." Sir Malcolm realized that the dynamic in the room had shifted completely. The woman addressing him was not asking for his approval or his permission. She was informing him of how things were going to be from this point forward. "Going forward," Camilla continued, returning to her seat but maintaining eye contact, "all decisions regarding my security and my events will be made in consultation with my private secretary and myself. You will treat my engagements with the same level of importance and resource allocation that you provide to other senior members of the family. And you will remember that disrespecting me in your professional capacity is the same as disrespecting the crown itself." The final statement hung in the air with unmistakable authority. Sir Malcolm understood that he was being given an ultimatum disguised as a professional directive. "I understand, Your Majesty," he said, and for the first time since entering the room, he truly meant it. "Good," Camilla replied, her demeanor softening slightly. "Malcolm, I don't need you to like me personally. I don't need you to approve of my past or my relationship with the king. But I do need you to do your job professionally and treat me with the respect that my position demands. Can you do that?" Sir Malcolm looked at the woman sitting across from him and realized that he had fundamentally misjudged her. The strength, intelligence, and dignity she was displaying weren't new developments. They had always been there. He had simply chosen not to see them because they didn't fit his preconceived narrative. "Yes, Your Majesty," he said. And this time he sat down in the chair she had originally offered him. "I can do that." 3 weeks later, James Richardson stood at attention in the Grand Hall of Windsor Castle, watching as Queen Camilla moved gracefully through the crowd of charity representatives, diplomats, and community leaders. The event that Sir Malcolm had originally wanted to move to a smaller venue was now in full swing, and the transformation was remarkable. The Grand Hall was filled with natural light streaming through the ancient windows, highlighting the elegant floral arrangements and the carefully positioned camera crews that would ensure the event received proper media coverage. Queen Camilla wore a stunning navy blue dress with a matching hat, and her confidence was evident in every gesture and conversation. James watched as she spent genuine time with each person she met, asking thoughtful questions about their work and remembering details from previous encounters. This was the woman he had seen in smaller settings for years, but now the world was getting to see her as well. Quite a change from what was originally planned, came a voice beside him. James turned to see Sir Malcolm Hartwell, his expression thoughtful as he observed the proceedings. "Yes, sir," James replied carefully. He wasn't entirely sure where he stood with the head of security, following his conversation with Queen Camilla 3 weeks earlier. He had fully expected to face some form of professional retaliation, but surprisingly, nothing had happened. "That conversation I had with Her Majesty," Sir Malcolm continued, his voice low so that only James could hear. "It was illuminating." James remained silent, unsure how much Sir Malcolm knew about his own role in encouraging Queen Camilla to demand better treatment. "She's quite remarkable, isn't she?" Sir Malcolm said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "I've spent 15 years in this household, and I thought I understood the dynamics, the personalities, the challenges. But I realize now that I was seeing what I expected to see rather than what was actually there." The admission was startling, coming from a man known for his rigid certainty and unwavering opinions. James glanced at Sir Malcolm and saw something he had never seen before: humility. "She's always been remarkable, sir," James replied quietly. "Some of us just took longer to notice." Sir Malcolm nodded slowly. "You were right to encourage her to speak up. I know you played a role in what happened, Richardson, and I want you to know that I respect you for it. It took courage to challenge the system, even indirectly." James felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been prepared to face consequences for his actions, but he had felt compelled to support a woman who had shown nothing but kindness and professionalism in all his interactions with her. "I just felt she deserved better, sir," he said simply. "She did," Sir Malcolm agreed. "And more importantly, the crown deserved better from me." Across the hall, Queen Camilla was engaged in an animated conversation with a group of young people who had started a community garden project in East London. Her eyes were bright with interest as they described their challenges and successes, and she offered practical suggestions based on her own extensive experience with similar initiatives. "Your Majesty," said Sarah Chen, a 16-year-old who had spearheaded the garden project, "when we started this, everyone told us it wouldn't work. They said we were too young, that we didn't understand the complications. But we just kept going, because we believed it was important." Camilla smiled, seeing something of her own journey reflected in the young woman's words. "That's the most important lesson anyone can learn, Sarah. Sometimes the people who tell you something won't work are really telling you that they don't want it to work. There's a difference." The comment drew knowing chuckles from several adults in the group, including 2 local council members who had initially opposed the garden project. "But how do you keep going when it feels like everyone is against you?" asked Marcus Thompson, another young participant, whose family had initially been skeptical of his involvement in the project. Camilla paused for a moment, considering her answer carefully. The question was clearly about more than just community gardening, and she recognized the universal nature of the challenge he was describing. "Marcus," she said, "I've learned that the opinion that matters most is your own. Not because other people's opinions don't have value, but because you're the one who has to live with the consequences of your choices. If you know in your heart that you're trying to do something good, something that will help people or make the world a little bit better, then you have an obligation to keep trying, even when it's difficult." She looked around the group, making eye contact with each young person as she continued. "There will always be people who doubt you, who want to put you in a box that makes them more comfortable, who think they know better than you do about your own life and your own capabilities. The secret is learning to distinguish between criticism that can help you improve and criticism that's really about the other person's fears or prejudices." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what happened with our garden. The council members who opposed it weren't really worried about our project. They were worried about what would happen if they supported us, and we failed. They didn't want to look bad. Precisely, Camilla said. And what did you do when you realized that? We stopped trying to convince them we wouldn't fail, Marcus chimed in. Instead, we showed them that failing wouldn't be the end of the world, and that the potential benefits were worth the risk. And how did that work out? Camilla asked, though she already knew the answer from the briefing materials she had received before the event. They not only approved our project, Sarah said with a grin, but they asked us to help design similar programs for 3 other communities. Councilman Williams, who was our biggest opponent at first, is here today because he wants to nominate our project for a national award. Camilla felt a surge of genuine pride and joy. This was exactly why she loved these events. The opportunity to connect with people who were making a real difference in their communities, and to learn from their experiences and perspectives. That, she said, is a perfect example of what can happen when you refuse to let other people's limitations become your own. As the group began to disperse, moving toward the reception tables where refreshments were being served, Sarah Chen lingered behind for a moment. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice slightly hesitant. "Can I ask you something personal?" Camilla nodded, curious about what the young woman wanted to know. "When you first became part of the royal family, did people try to tell you that you shouldn't have the same opportunities as everyone else? That you should be grateful for smaller roles or less important events?" The question was so perceptive that Camilla felt momentarily speechless. This 16-year-old had somehow intuited the exact challenge that had brought her to this point. "Yes, Sarah," she said honestly. "Some people did feel that way. And for a long time, I accepted it because I thought I had to prove that I deserved better treatment rather than simply expecting it." "What changed?" Sarah asked. Camilla glanced across the room and caught James Richardson's eye. He was standing next to Sir Malcolm, both men watching her with expressions of respect and support that would have been unimaginable just a few weeks ago. "I had a conversation with someone who reminded me that accepting disrespect doesn't actually prove anything positive about your character," she said. "It just enables other people to continue treating you poorly. Sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary." Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. "Like when we stopped trying to make our project smaller, just to make the council more comfortable. When we insisted that our original vision was worth fighting for." "Exactly like that," Camilla confirmed. "The moment you start believing that you deserve respect rather than hoping you might earn it, everything changes." As Sarah rejoined her friends at the reception tables, Camilla took a moment to survey the scene around her. The grand hall was filled with laughter and animated conversation. Representatives from a dozen different charitable organizations were networking and sharing ideas. Local community leaders were connecting with national policymakers. The media coverage would help spotlight important issues and inspire other communities to launch similar initiatives. This was what royal events were supposed to accomplish: bringing people together, amplifying important voices, and using the platform of the monarchy to shine light on work that might otherwise go unnoticed. For too long, her own events had been diminished and constrained by people who saw her presence as a problem to be managed rather than a resource to be utilized. King Charles appeared at her side, his hand gently touching her elbow as he leaned in to speak quietly. "This is magnificent, darling," he said, his voice warm with genuine admiration. "The energy in this room is extraordinary, and I can see how much these conversations mean to you." "They mean everything to me," she replied, turning to smile at her husband. "This is why we do this work, isn't it? To connect with people who are making a difference, and to help amplify their efforts." Charles nodded, his own gaze moving across the room to take in the diverse crowd and the obvious enthusiasm of the participants. "I heard from Malcolm that there were some adjustments made to the event planning process," he said carefully. "I gather you had some concerns about how your engagements were being handled." Camilla looked at her husband, wondering how much detail Sir Malcolm had shared with him about their conversation. "I simply made it clear that I expected to be treated with the same professional respect as other members of the family," she said. It was a conversation that was long overdue. Charles studied her face, seeing something new in her expression. A quiet confidence that had always been there, but was now more visible, more assertive. "Good," he said simply. "You should never have had to ask for that. But I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself when it became necessary." As the afternoon continued, word of the successful event began to spread beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. Social media posts from attendees highlighted meaningful conversations and new collaborations. News coverage focused on the substantive policy discussions and community initiatives that had been featured. Several organizations announced new partnerships that had been formed during the networking sessions. But perhaps most importantly, the people who worked within the royal household began to see Queen Camilla differently. Her willingness to demand better treatment hadn't made her more difficult to work with. It had made her more effective. Staff members who had previously seen her as accommodating to the point of invisibility now recognized her as a leader who knew her own worth and expected others to respect it. James Richardson, standing at his post as the event wound down, reflected on the conversation that had started this transformation. 3 weeks ago, Queen Camilla had asked for his honest assessment of how she was being treated. Today, she was receiving the respect and support that should have been hers from the beginning. Sir Malcolm Hartwell approached him one final time as they prepared for the royal family's departure. "Richardson," he said, "I wanted to thank you for your service today, and for your service over the past few weeks. You helped prevent what could have been a significant injustice, and you did it with courage and integrity." James nodded his appreciation for the recognition, but his attention was still focused on Queen Camilla as she made her final rounds, thanking organizers and saying goodbye to participants. "Sir," he said, "if I may ask, how do you think this changes things going forward?" Sir Malcolm followed his gaze to where Queen Camilla was engaged in one last conversation with the group of young community gardeners. "I think," he said thoughtfully, "that we all just learned something very important about the difference between earning respect and demanding it. And I think Queen Camilla just taught us that sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself and others is to refuse to accept anything less than what you deserve." As the royal car pulled away from Windsor Castle that evening, Queen Camilla looked back at the ancient building that had witnessed so much history, so many triumphs and challenges. Today had marked a turning point, not just for her own role within the royal family, but for her understanding of her own worth and power. The guard's response had indeed left her speechless, but not in the way the story's title might have suggested. James Richardson's honesty and support had given her the courage to demand better, and the results had exceeded her highest expectations. Sometimes, she realized, the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of courage. A guard willing to speak truth to power, and a queen finally ready to claim the respect she had always deserved.